Continuing with the themes of Ethics of the Fathers, we're trying to focus on one theme as it relates to a paragraph, a Mishnah. We're up to the two rabbis who are quoted here, Shmaya. And the theme is how we should relate to government. Is government good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? You know, that's a question if the Yankees win the World Series, is it good for the Jews or bad for the Jews? Everything has to connect back again to it's good for the Jews when they win, okay. But the question is, Uncle Hank. So the question is, what is the Jewish view towards government? So let's learn a little bit inside, and then we'll Aya and Avtalion, as the rabbis mentioned before. With English and Hebrew. The work. You should despise the.
We'll put it back in again.
So we'll have to explain that also. And the third thing is, do not attach or near to the ruling authority. Don't get close to the government. Okay. Before we go on any further, Shmaya and Avtalion were, according to Rambam, converts to Judaism. They were descendants of Sancherib, the Assyrian king who exiled the 10 tribes. And some of his descendants converted to Judaism, and Shmaya and Avtalion were converts. And Shmaya and Avtalion rose to the top of Jewish leadership. They were the heads of the Sanhedrin. Remember, the Sanhedrin had two heads. The Nasi was the president, he was the public figure, and the second in command was called the Av Bedin, the father of the court. He was more internal. So usually the first name was the Nasi, Shmaya was the leader, and Avtalion was his deputy. But they were both converts to Judaism. And that has something to do with the teaching as well. So we'll develop that as we go on. But I just want to share a story the Talmud relates. The Talmud relates that on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest day of the year, the most important spiritual person is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and he enters into the temple, into the inner precincts of the temple, into the Holy of Holies, the holiest place on earth, to pray for a good year and beseech God for the benefit of all the people, so that the Day of Atonement should be a Day of Atonement. And when the Kohen Gadol would leave the temple, that was like the highlight of the year. Throngs of thousands, tens of thousands of people would follow, that it would take literally hours for him to get home. And Jerusalem was not that big. And I guess it was hard to get an Uber in the crowd, so he had to walk all the way home. And as the crowd is following him and jubilantly celebrating his safe emergence from the temple alive, they noticed Shmaya and Naphtalion were walking in another street, a nearby street. So they dumped the high priest and they started following Shmaya and Naphtalion. Because the high priest they didn't respect, they respected his office. Shmaya and Naphtalion, they respected, yes, the office, but the people themselves. The people themselves were highly respected. And then when Shmaya and Naphtalion came to wish well to the high priest insulted them, referring to their ancestry, that they were not really full-fledged Jews. They were descendants, or either they were converts themselves. And they repeated back to him, and I'm paraphrasing, he said, at least we follow your ancestor, Aaron, who loved peace and loved people and brought them close. You would do well if you would follow your grandfather. So you're talking about our ancestry, we'll talk about your ancestry. So that is the background of Shmaya and Naphtalion. They lived at a very tumultuous time, civil wars in Israel between the different descendants of the Hashmonaim. And based on that backdrop, I think we can understand a little bit of what Shmaya was trying to say. He was trying to warn us against the pursuit of power, the pursuit of power. And power can manifest itself in several ways. It can manifest itself with people who, because of their desire for power, what do they look for? They look for power, but they don't care about the work itself. So yes, there has to be areas in life where you need people who are in power. You can't just let everyone a free-for-all. You'll have anarchy. You need leaders. But if the leader is focused on leadership, he wants to be the leader. That's why he uses the definite article, despise the Rabbanut. Despise the leadership and the power that is vested in the rabbi or in the leaders. Love the work, commentaries explain, is referring to not rabbis shouldn't be rabbis, they should go out and become plumbers. That's not what it's saying. If they know how to be plumbers, why not? But most rabbis wouldn't do a very good job in doing plumbing work. And most plumbers would probably not be great rabbis if they only have plumbing experience. So it's not trying to tell us we should abandon this profession because it's leadership. It's trying to say, what should you love about leadership? You should love the work involved, the labor involved, the toil that you're working hard to inspire and help others. Despise the leadership part of it. Yes, you have to be a leader, but don't get enjoyment, don't get satisfaction that you have this power, that you're the leader. And then the third point was, don't get too close to government. Some people feel that the closer they are to the government, the more influence they have and the more power they have and the better off they are. Don't get close to government because, as it says in another Mishnah, they're only nice to you when they need you, and when they don't need you, they abandon you, they drop you like a hot potato. Government is not an idealistic institution. It has never been an idealistic institution. It's interesting that we sometimes look up to people who are in politics, who have governmental positions, and very often those are the lowliest people in society. They're sometimes the most immoral, the most egotistical. There are exceptions to the rule, but generally speaking, people who go into government, even if they start off with altruistic objectives, end up stepping on other people's toes and their heads to get where they get to stay in power. So we have a real cynical view of government on one hand. On the other hand, we know that when the Jews were exiled into Babylonia, and Babylonians were not nice to us, Nebuchadnezzar was a tyrant, a mass murderer, and yet the prophet Jeremiah told the people to respect the king, respect the government. In other words, recognize that the government is providing for your needs and give them the respect that they deserve. So it seems we have this nuanced view of government. On the one hand, don't get too close to government. On the other hand, appreciate that there is a concept of government. In another Mishnah it says, if not for fear of government, we'd be swallowing each other alive. That's the very simple meaning of that, and the simple meaning has value. If you wouldn't have a policeman on the beat in many communities, you would have everyone beaten. Or pun. Now they beat the policeman. If not for the fact that there's a fear of apprehension, that this country and any other country in the world, except in certain neighborhoods you can keep your doors open, no one's going to mug you, no one's afraid, but that's not the truth about most of society. So we need government. You need to have the fear of government, respect for government, and we are very loyal and faithful citizens as a people. We've always been, and it always came to hurt us, because when one country would try to conquer another, the Jews were always faithful to their host country. The other people still saw that the conquerors are winning, so they would show that they're in favor of the conquerors. If they saw their host country winning, they would go back over here. They would follow the winner. Jews, and again I'm generalizing, I'm sure there were a lot of Jews who were on both sides, but Jews, in the Civil War we had Jews in the north, we had Jews in the south. But Jews, as a general rule, are faithful to their host government. Even Egypt. How many of us remember what happened in Egypt? Every day we remember it. There's nothing in a human being's life that they remember every day. You don't even remember that you have to pay taxes every day. April comes around, you start thinking about taxes. But what do people think of every single day? As a Jew, every day we talk about what we did in Egypt and our exodus from Egypt. They were not nice to us. They enslaved us for 210 years. They murdered us. And yet the Torah says, don't despise an Egyptian, because you were in his land. You were strangers in his land. He was the host country. So we're supposed to show respect even to a bad host country. So on one hand, we're not supposed to trust the government. Don't put your trust in government. So how do we reconcile this seeming contradiction? On one hand, government is to be mistrusted. Government, keep away from it. If you have to deal with the government, do it with a lot of suspicion and mistrust. Don't ever let yourself to become vulnerable to think that the government really cares about you. Government, by definition, doesn't care except for itself. It's an institution that wants to perpetuate itself because the people there want this power. But on the other hand, we have to have respect for it. There's an expression of the Talmud, Malchusa da'ara ke'ein Malchusa de'rikia. The government down here on earth is analogous to the government on high, the heavenly government. In other words, the government down here is an institution that represents a higher government. To the extent that they're faithful to that higher purpose, then of course we have respect for them. When they start to do things that are contrary to morality, then we have to show that we're not accepting what they're telling us. We don't just blindly follow what a government does. When the government stands behind immorality, as it is today, so many members of the different bodies of government in America and other parts of the world are promoting immorality and promoting all sorts of evil, what we used to call evil, and now they call it just alternative lifestyles and similar things like that. We don't have to respect the government in that regard. We respect the government to the extent that they do what they are commissioned to do to reflect the heavenly government. There's a story told about a certain Jew who was a leader in the community in Vilna. Vilna was the stronghold of the opposition to the Hasidic movement. And one of the leaders, whose name was Meir Refael, was a very distinguished rabbi in his own right. He was the communal leader for a time. And he became an ardent follower of Rabbi Shneir Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe. He was an opponent and he became an ardent disciple. And there are two stories that describe what caused him to make that transition. He once was visited by a woman who said her husband disappeared. And she can't get remarried because she doesn't know where her husband is, and she can't remarry and she doesn't have a husband. So he says to her, "Why did you come to me?" She traveled hundreds of miles to come to him. She said, "Because Rabbi Shneir Zalman, I came to him and he told me I should go to you." He says, he's Hasidic, you know. He wanted to get rid of you, so he sends you a few hundred miles away from me. He's not, how should I find you your husband? You don't even live in this area. So she says, "I'm sorry, I'm not leaving this house until you find my husband." So the man was a compassionate person, so he let her stay in his house. And this is going on for days, maybe a few weeks. And one day, the police call him and say, "We have some Jewish prisoners." And whenever they had Jewish prisoners, they would call the communal leaders, so the communal leaders could take care of their religious needs. And he comes to the police station, and who does he see? He sees a man that fits the description of this woman's husband. And indeed, that was the husband. And that had a happy ending. So he said, "You know what, it was a coincidence." But then, there was another story. And the other story was that two business people were charged with some type of criminal offense by the Russian authorities, and it looked very bad. Their lawyers told them, "You don't have a very good case, you're going to be convicted." So they came to the Alter Rebbe, asking him for his advice. So he looks at them, he says, "You look like Torah scholars. I'd like to ask you a question. It says in the Talmud that the earthly kingdom is like the heavenly kingdom. What does that mean?" They're looking at each other, rolling their eyes. This is what we came to. We came because we have a serious problem with our case, and maybe this rabbi has some influence and is asking us communal questions. So they said, "No, we don't know what it means." He says, "I'll tell you what it means. In the Talmud it says that God's name, when we write it, we don't pronounce it the way it's written. We don't pronounce God's essential name, we pronounce it differently. The same way you don't refer to the Tsar by his name, by his proper name. You call him the Tsar." And they look, and then Shneir Zalman says, "And have a nice day." That's it. And they said, "Well, this rabbi is, what do we gain from this?" So then they decided, the lawyer told them, the only chance you have is if you go to Petersburg, the capital, and you find the Minister of Justice, the Justice Minister, and just plead with him to have some compassion. So they find out that this Justice Minister used to hang out in a certain park. Every day he would take a stroll. So they got into this park, they bribed the guards there. Those days, that in Russia, you had to bribe to do anything. And they sat down, and they see from the distance a very distinguished-looking person walking. So they assumed that that was the Minister of Justice. And they run towards him, and they throw themselves on the ground, crying and pleading, "Please save us, help us." And the man looks at them and says, who are you talking to? Who do you want us to address? They said, "Aren't you the Justice Minister?" He said, "No, I'm the Culture Minister." The Justice Minister didn't show up that day. So, but he had some compassion. He saw that they were in a lot of trouble. He said, "You know what? You look like learned people, Jews." He knows Jews are always into learning. He says, "I have a question that the Tsar asked me." The Tsar was very interested in what Jews say about government. They were very sensitive to anything that Jews would say that was an attack and a criticism of the Tsar. It says, in your Talmud, it says that the government on earth is like the government in heaven. What does that mean? So immediately they had the answer that Rabbi Shneir Zalman gave them, and he was very impressed. He says, "You know what? I'm going to speak to the Tsar on your behalf." And they were acquitted. They were exonerated. So that, I brought the story because that's what the Talmud says, that there's a certain aura in the person of the leader that reflects a higher authority. But whenever you reflect something higher, you have the free choice to be receptive to that or to distort it. And that's why we have to be wary of government, because while government has some positive value, you always have to worry that it will also cause a lot of damage when their intentions are less than noble. In general, Shmaya is advocating a position that people should not look for power. And throughout Jewish history, I mentioned this many times, all of the Jewish leaders that we know of today that are revered were people who did not want to be in positions of leadership. They always rejected it, beginning with Moses. When God comes to Moses and says, I want you to be the leader, he says, no, it's not for me, I'm not qualified. And he argues with God. Now imagine that. God could come to talk to you and tell you to do something, and you say, I'm sorry, God, but that's not for me. Because he was so opposed to having a position of power that to him it was the worst possible thing. Yes?
I thought also because he had that speech impediment that was due to when he burnt his tongue with the charcoal when Pharaoh was
Right,
testing
he
him.
mentioned that I'm
Yeah.
so God argued, blew up that argument.
And
Says,
then he said, I'll have somebody help you in Aaron.
right, but every argument Moses gave was all just to get out of it. He didn't want to be the leader until God more or less twisted his arm until he finally accepted. And according to the Midrash, it took a whole week of God convincing him. Now, if God needs a week to convince a person, you know that it's not something that a great Jewish person really wants. He didn't want that leadership. And throughout history, great Jewish leaders did not want to become leaders. In the most recent time, the example of that is the Rebbe. I mentioned this also many times. After the previous Rebbe passed away in 1950, most of the Hasidim, he left two sons-in-law. The other son-in-law was older than the Rebbe and a very esteemed rabbi in his own right. But most of the Hasidim, like 99%, wanted the Rebbe to become the leader. The only one who was really adamantly opposed to it was the Rebbe himself. He said, absolutely not, I'm not qualified, it's not for me. There's a letter that the Rebbe wrote to a rabbi before he became Rebbe, before his father-in-law passed away. He wrote a letter to Rabbi Lando, the chief rabbi of Bnei Brak, the grandfather of the new chief rabbi now. And the Rebbe says to him, I never had any talent for communal work. That's not my strength. But you do have that talent, so you should do more. But so the Rebbe considered himself to be incapable of communal leadership. And the Rebbe was not a person who would just say it out of humility. He meant it. And every time they came to him, he used another argument that he couldn't do it. One time, maybe more than one time, when they came to him and they pressured him, he broke down crying like a baby. He says, and he called himself by his name, he mentioned his own name, to be a Rebbe? That's impossible. Then they once came to him and they argued that he has to be, and then he used the excuse, my father-in-law never told me that I should be his successor. So what did they do? A minion of rabbis went to the graveside of the father-in-law and they told him, your son-in-law says that he was never told. He never used that excuse again. But he used other excuses. Only his wife, at the end of a full year, said to him, as I don't know what the source of this is, maybe she mentioned it to someone, but this is a well-known story, that if you don't accept the leadership, then my father's work will go down the drain. The previous Rebbe all his efforts will have not continued. So then he reluctantly, begrudgingly accepted. And throughout his entire leadership, he always considered his father-in-law to be the leader. That he's just the shliach, and doing his father-in-law's work. And he would refer to his father-in-law as the Rebbe. To such an extent that any person, every person who wrote a letter to the Rebbe, the Rebbe's response to everyone, in addition to whatever else he wrote, was, I will mention your name at the graveside of my father-in-law. which he did. As he got older, he would visit the gravesite more frequently. So in the last few years, he would go to the gravesite at least 2 times a week and stand there for 5 to 7 hours, reading off the names of every person who wrote to him for a blessing. And here's a man in his late 80s, standing in one place, and that was a fast day. Whenever he went to the cemetery, he would only drink something, but that's it, he wouldn't eat that whole day. And when he got back, it was late at night, he would speak for a half hour, and then give out dollars to everyone. In addition to what he did every Sunday, where he stood and gave out dollars to thousands of people every Sunday. So, but the Rebbe's refusal to be a leader is in tradition of all the great Jewish leaders. Yes?
Somebody else I know, Dennis Prager, has been asked by many people to run for president. And his answer is that he's not interested in power. He wants to only influence people. So he turns it down all the time. That's why he needs to probably be a good president.
You're right. I mean, people who want power that badly are usually not good presidents, not good leaders. But we don't have much choice yet, because people who don't want it don't end up getting it. So you're forced to take. But nevertheless, the Rebbe did accept. Moses did accept. Baal Shem Tov did accept, even though he didn't want. The Maggid of Mizrich, who didn't want to become a public person, did accept. So obviously, the fact that they accepted in the end means that they knew that they had the ability to accomplish what a leader has to accomplish, and they begrudgingly accepted it because they knew that this was the right thing. So yes, the pursuit of power, we had a whole class about the Mishnah where it says, one who is honored, one who honors others. Why do you want to be honored? You don't want to be honored because you want prestige, you want power. You want to be honored because you have a position of importance that requires that people respect you, so you can have the influence and you can achieve what you're set out to achieve. If a person in positions of power has no one respecting him or her, then the person will be ineffective. The person cannot accomplish anything, so what's the point in being a leader? So a leader will demand, to some extent, that people respect and honor his position, his role, but they're not looking. They hate the leadership part of it. They love the work. They love the ability to help others. Just another short story. One of the leading Hasidim, whose name is Rabbi Weinberg, Rabbi Joseph Weinberg, he was the one who taught Tanya on the radio. Very distinguished scholar and traveled all over the world raising funds and inspiring people. So he gets a call from Mr. Safra. Ever heard of Safra? Very poor guy. He owns international, he's an international banker, a multi-billionaire. And he calls them and he says, I think it was a relative that was very ill. I want you to go to ask the Rebbe for a blessing. And Rabbi Arm said, it's 2 a.m. What do you want me to do? And a guy like Mr. Safra doesn't take no for an answer. He says, I don't know what you have to do, but you have to do it. So Rabbi Weinberg decided, I'll go to 770, the Rebbe's office, and I'll see if the lights are on, I'll knock on the door. Even though that was not a usual thing, but it's an emergency, so I would do it. If I see the lights are off, I'll wait till the morning. So he goes there and he sees that there was only a lamp. You could see from the outside that it wasn't the main lights, only one lamp. So he wasn't sure, is the Rebbe taking a nap at 2 a.m. or maybe he's up? So he decided he's going to write down the situation and the request for a blessing and put it under the door and let a little bit stick out. So if he sees that it disappears, it means the Rebbe is up and he took the note. Sure enough, within a few seconds, the note disappears. And the Rebbe, right after that, sent out a message that he gives his blessing and so on. The next day, Rabbi Weinberg felt very guilty. because he made the Rebbe stoop down to pick up his piece of paper. So he wrote a letter of apology to the Rebbe that I made you stoop to pick up the letter. And the Rebbe's response was, you don't have to apologize. My whole purpose in life is to lift people up. So the fact that he had to lift up the note, he says, that's what I'm here for. That justifies my existence. That was the Rebbe's passion, to uplift people and to, just one other story I just heard this last week. There was another distinguished rabbi, Rabbi J.J. Hecht. And, right, he was in charge of organizing a massive children's parade on Lag BaOmer, and there were a lot of obstacles, and he was like very down, very depressed, because everything was going the wrong way. Finally, when the parade happened, it was a very successful parade, and the Rebbe would come and speak to the thousands of children, and the Rebbe turns to Rabbi Hecht and he says, did you get rid of your depression? And he says, yes, the Rebbe schlepped me out of it. He used that expression in Yiddish. So the Rebbe says, no, I didn't schlep you out, I uplifted you. Very big difference. The Rebbe didn't schlep people, he uplifted them. But that's what he loved. That was his passion. The honor, the prestige, he wasn't interested. When President Carter said he wanted to speak to the Rebbe on his birthday, I think it was Carter, and the Rebbe, so he mentioned this to one of the Hasidim, because every year they sign a declaration, the Congress and the President honoring the Rebbe's birthday. So the rabbi who was in charge of it was speaking to President Carter. President Carter said, oh, I'd like to call the Rebbe on his birthday. And this rabbi says, well, I'll have to check with the Rebbe. And the president tells you, I want to speak to someone on their birthday, and you say, well, we don't know. And the Rebbe's answer was, tell him no, because the birthday is a very private day. It's a day of introspection. It's not an appropriate time for social niceties. And the Rebbe says he will understand that, and he won't be upset. And he did. So, everyone would be delighted to be in that position where the president wants to call you and to wish you a happy birthday. The Rebbe wasn't interested in that type of honor, in that type of prestige. Most of what the Rebbe did, he did behind the scenes. You know, the Rebbe did so many things publicly, but he did even more things behind the scenes to help people, to help organizations. He even helped organizations that were critical of the Rebbe and were competition. I'll give you one story. There are many stories. I'll just give you one. The Rebbe started in 1941. He started a children's magazine called Talks and Tales. It was the first of its kind, I believe, in America. Stories and commentary on the Torah for children. The Rebbe had so much love for it that the Rebbe himself personally edited it for decades. The Rebbe edited two things besides his own work. He edited the magazine for children and the magazine for women. I know that because I wrote an article for that second magazine, and I have the Rebbe's edits. He corrected grammar as well as textual concepts. And he had other things to do, but he felt so strongly about the need for children to be given good material and to uplift the role of women in Judaism, who everyone thought were second-class citizens. At any rate, this magazine was very dear to the Rebbe. Another organization called Masorah started their own children's magazine a year or two later called Olamenu. I'm sure you've heard of that magazine. A very nice magazine. It was in direct competition, and they never really had a positive attitude towards Chabad. For example, they used to have a column where they would take one great rabbi, and write his biography. They never did that with any Chabad rabbis. They clearly steered clear of having any relationship with Chabad. They came to a point where they were suffering financially, and they were going to close shop. The Rebbe found out about it, And he gave them a substantial donation of a few $1,000s, I believe. This goes back 60 years probably. And like, it's like $20,000, $30,000 today. And that kept them in operation. It was never publicized. The Rebbe didn't ask for it to be publicized. They never publicized it. And how do we know about it? Because the person who was the liaison was the one who told the story. That's how we know about it. So there's someone who wants leadership, but he hates the leadership part. He loves the work. That's the ultimate goal in leadership. So to the extent that government people are really altruistic and they love the work, but they hate the power, those are the people that you could look to for guidance. And that's the part of government that you respect. Okay, I'm announcing my candidacy for president.
Which shul?
Shul, oh,
Yeah, president of the shul.
no, I mean, almost everyone is trying to become the president on the Democratic side, so I don't want to be left out.
We don't want to be on that side.
Any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. How come there is nobody that people wanted to step up when at the Rebbe passing? Because it's obviously being run, and it's being run very well, but
Not by any,
one person.
there's no one person and no two people, there's no hierarchy of that. The people who call themselves the leaders of Chabad have absolutely zero leadership roles in terms of nobody consults with them as to how they should lead their lives and what policies they should follow. All of that has already been established by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe put every shliach, on his own 2 feet, and the Rebbe says we're smart enough, we're mature enough to be able to carry on the work. And the Rebbe himself hinted that there will not be another Rebbe.